Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird, true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. Case file number 542, written by whtafntime, the boy with glowing green eyes. My sister's mom, we'll call her T, told me a story about a time from when she was little, maybe 8 or 9. She and her sister, a little bit older than her, were walking home at night as the streetlights came on. They lived in a small town where pretty much everyone knew each other. As they were walking home, a boy, teenager, with glowing green eyes came out from behind a tree and was just staring at them. He had on a gray hoodie. He looked human, but had glowing green eyes. They both noticed, and she said they both just felt very uncomfortable. The boy starts walking towards them, and they start to panic, so they start running. The boy chases them, and he catches up with them and grabs onto T's arm. T and her sister begin struggling with him, and he's just growling the whole time like an animal while squeezing her arm. He even left a bruise. They finally got loose and ran as fast as they could to the nearest business. They ran inside and shut and pulled the glass doors behind them as tight as they could, but instead of pursuing them, he just stopped and turned around. They called their mother to come and get them and told them what happened. They called the police and they began searching for the guy, which she explained he shouldn't have been hard to find because the way the community is set up, there were only so many places he could go. There were woods nearby, but she said if he ran in the woods, he would have been caught because of the dead ends. She said they searched that whole town and he was never found. They even asked around town, this is a close-knit community, if anyone knew who he was, and no one knew him or saw him before. And he was unmistakable. I guess I'm just trying to figure out if anyone has a similar experience or knows who or what this could have been. Case notes, file number 542. Recently I was put onto a new show on Amazon, simply titled Hannah. In it, a girl is raised by her father out in the woods, and he trains her to be self-reliant, strong. Of course, given she never leaves the forest for 16 years, the first time she does, she acts more like an animal from a normal human perspective. She even accidentally harms a boy she meets who was just trying to help her. I was thinking of the introduction of the show while reading this story. The fact he had piercing green eyes could be a coincidence, maybe even related to harsh and limited diet from growing up in the wild, which is what sounds like happened. Or was he something else entirely, not of this world? Bonus file, written by Mystery Chick 88, the decaying maw of a mouth that haunts my dreams. I do not know how she found me or why she hated me, but I will tell you the first time I ever saw her. I was dreaming I had entered into a small country pub. The ceilings were low and it had that musty smell of beer and thyme. Outside the windows was a quiet, rural lane surrounded by hedgerows and what looked like farmers' fields beyond that. It was a lovely warm day, but the scene was eerily quiet. There were 2 sections to the pub, one side which was devoid of anyone and what looked like to be a working bar, and the other side was closed off to the public and looked like it was being used to store old furniture. I found myself wandering around the furniture admiring a beautiful antique writing bureau when I suddenly felt disoriented. My legs started to give way as my head began to spin out of nowhere. My center of gravity was thrown out of whack and I stumbled onto the floor, and a fear I could not explain started to overcome me. I knew something was wrong and I had the feeling of being circled by a predator, one I could not see. In a state of panic, I shuffled back on the floor until my back made contact with something solid, an old dusty chest of drawers, and I tried to calm my breathing, not making any sense of why I felt like I was in so much danger. Then I heard a noise above me, a disturbing, croaky death rattle-like sound. I was terrified, but I found myself slowly raising my head to see what was there. I couldn't help it. I shouldn't have looked, but that macabre sound drew my attention like a moth to flame. Slowly leering over the top of the drawers directly above me, a face came into view looking down over me. It was a woman, strikingly beautiful if not cold-looking. Pale blonde curls pinned on top of her head, icy blue eyes, young, no more than 30. But her mouth was what was the most terrifying part. It was stretched open into a gaping black hole with torn, cracked flesh stretching even further, making her face a disfigured, warped, horrifying mess. The rattling coming from within that cavernous abyss. I have never felt a fear like it. The sort which strips your brain of any normal function and sends your gut plummeting. I could barely scream. I was that scared. It was more like a high-pitched, hysterical whimper which barely left my mouth as her face came closer. Then I woke up sweating and still trying to scream. As disturbing as the dream was, I thought it was just that, a nightmare, although I have never been able to get her face out of my head all these years later. Roughly 6 weeks later, I had another nightmare in which I was involved in a vicious assault on the street outside my home. In this dream, the police came and I was being pinned to the ground and arrested with the assailants. I noticed a figure walking around the periphery of the circle of police and people. As my face was being pushed into the ground, it was hard to see who it was, but they were getting closer and closer to the tangle of bodies on the floor. As the police pulled me up, I saw it was a crooked old woman, bedraggled and dirty hair hanging in her face. It was full of debris and dirt. She was in an old-fashioned white nightdress. My stomach lurched, and although she looked different, I knew it was the same woman I had encountered in my nightmare weeks before. As if she sensed my realization, she rapidly lurched forward between the police holding me in place and sank her teeth into my arm and disappeared, leaving my arm an immediate septic mess crawling with maggots and decaying. The pain was what woke me up. I bolted upright, expecting to see teeth marks on my forearm as it throbbed, and although there were none there, the area was red as if I had been pinched. I suspected then that these were not ordinary dreams and that she was a separate entity, not some recurring imaginary figure. I didn't know yet that she was a witch, but the more she encroached into my dreams and life, the more I physically saw snippets of her. She had a knack for showing herself two different ways. One, the young beautiful woman, although never again with that hideous deformed mouth, and the other, a stereotypical hag. Every few weeks, I would encounter her in my dreams, which was where I figured out she was a dreamwalker, as I called this gift. Not sure if it's the correct term, a spirit or entity that can manipulate someone's dreams. In another dream, she was standing by my bed. She had her hands around my throat, slowly squeezing until I couldn't breathe. Then I woke up violently, gasping for breath. I had that same experience several times. Another time on my day off of work, I woke up and feeling lazy, decided to lounge in bed a little longer, in and out of sleep, until I became acutely aware of someone very close to me, staring at the back of my head. I knew it was her, and everything inside me screamed, "Do not turn around and look at her." So I stayed still, face pushed into my pillow. And then something peculiar happened. As if I was standing in the corner of my bedroom, I could see everything. Me lying in bed, covered up and face down, and hovering about 2 feet above my body, there was an opaque, brown, swirling humanoid mass. Other times I would dream she was hovering above me, and in a half-sleeping/awake state, too terrified to move, she would reach inside my chest, and I could feel an odd pressure around my heart, squeezing, causing it to beat out of rhythm. All I could do was lay there and pray that I didn't have a heart attack, as the thumping of my heart inside my chest would speed up rapidly and then slow down, so there were seconds between each beat. I tried putting a protection boundary around my home, but it never seemed to keep her out. In the end, my spirit guides shut me down entirely to protect me from her. I guess being psychically open was what kept the link going between us. The complete radio silence I had for 3 years was eerie to say the least, and not something I was used to, as having random spirits popping in and out had been my way of life since I was 11 years old. It did the job. I didn't see her again for 3 years. When I became pregnant with my daughter, I unintentionally started to open up again. I only had 2 more experiences with her after this, although I was disheartened to know she was still linked to me. The night she showed herself again, she entered my dream as usual. I was laying in bed, and in this dream I woke and my quilt was hovering a few feet in the air above me. Through the gap in the dark between myself and the floating quilt, I could see someone shuffling around the edge of my bed, back and forth. The familiar feeling of fear that came with her held me in place, scared crapless out of what she was going to do next. To my absolute horror, the figure climbed underneath the hovering quilt at the foot of the bed and slowly worked its way over my body until she was on top of me and her face in front of mine. Her hair trailed across my skin and she smelt of damp earth. Then she spoke. "You thought I was gone," she hissed at me, and all I could do was try and scream myself awake. Suddenly the quilt dropped back into the bed and I bolted upright, finally awake. My quilt, which I usually cocooned myself inside, was stuffed down on the floor between my bed frame and the wall with the window that looked out into the street. I refused to sleep at my home the next night, telling my friend I couldn't believe she was back after all this time had passed. My last encounter I ever had with her was so odd to say the least, as it seemed as if she couldn't get as close to me as usual. Again in my dream, I awoke and she had me by the throat, both of us dangling in the air over my bed. She was her younger self, porcelain skin, fair hair, and all just staring into my soul as I struggled to breathe. I can't explain the look she had on her face. It wasn't anger, disgust, I don't know, just a cold indifference to me with maybe a hint of defeat. I felt different, and although I woke up struggling to breathe and with a sore neck, I don't think she had actually been inside the room with me. It was the last I ever saw of her, and hopefully ever will. I questioned myself early on whether it was a form of sleep paralysis, but I know that it wasn't, because of all the marks on my body. I have never suffered with it before or since, and that explanation just doesn't seem to fit. I suspect she was trying to stop my heart or physically scare me to death, but why? As I said, I saw glimpses of her life. I know she was a healer woman in a small community, but over time, she seemed to get treated with more suspicion and hatred, and shunned out of the area until she was living on the very periphery of society. Maybe once respected, then feared. I have no doubts she was immensely gifted in life, but unfortunately, she has passed over with them same gifts, fully understanding how to manipulate energy. Hands down, one of the few spirits which straight up terrified me.